Welcome to the new Kevin Smith Great Witness Show, the New Adventure series is. We're here with Dean Kevin Smith. I'm Dean Bell, and we're going to hear experiences, real side experiences from Kevin, and see if we can become more aware and recognize true reality life is. Hi, Kevin. Welcome.
This real side experience would begin in a setting that presented as though a school or university of a kind. What I have found generally with school setting scenarios on the real side is that they tend represent literalism. They tend represent the personal self, representing that I am perhaps overly immersing myself in created ideas and illusions of the mind. There are two states of being, broadly speaking. There is the standing real with life and supporting of the true reality through the nowness of the real awareness, which is a part of the is, a nowness, beingness, that can only be so if, like the sun shining, we assume a state of just being without utilizing any of the body vehicles, the idea generators of the created self. And the other state then would be the activation of the faculties of the vehicles of the personal self, which as we do so, we draw ourselves from the nowness of the real awareness. As anything created, any idea, thought, or emotion is that which the nowness of the real awareness, the isness, is not, which is a simulated reality that encapsulates these parts or pieces that we have isolated as ideas, which we then are the effect of. This then gives us our overall comparison, the isness, real awareness, true reality, everything position, and the personal self that we step into as we decide on the encapsulated ideas or pieces that we do and to experience. For it is only through the nowness of the real awareness position that we can recognize the is, as the personal self is designed only to perceive the simulation it effects. And so, every time we activate through the personal self vehicles, we are no longer standing in the true reality that the real awareness is a part of. We would still be in the simulation if we have a created personal self body vehicle, regardless of if we assume the nowness of our real awareness or are standing in the illusions effected from the activations of the body vehicle ideas, as the consciousness will be the constant projector of the simulated experience based on its design of agreement ideas, but through the nowness of the real awareness and with the intent to recognize the is, we can become no longer in agreement with whatever the consciousness comprises of. We are no longer the continued, perpetuated, projected effect of it and into future lifetimes. For if we cling on to the consciousness and personal self, as we decide that is our reality, it is the equivalent of a constant activation of all the ideas of the consciousness, like having an extensive movie constantly playing, and we must then constantly sit through its simulation. And so, rather than maintain a position as the constant effects of our consciousness, and with the endless additional ideas we create through the body vehicles, we rather decide instead to establish more so our nowness real awareness position, and only utilize creation in a beneficial, supporting of life ways through that which we create. And every created idea has the effect that follows, but with everything equaling itself, as we create in ways that support all life and awareness, we earn our recognition of the ears, as opposed to just creating that which is personal self-serving, and all we then do is cycle endlessly in creation according to the nature of that which we are effecting for ourselves. But as we go through our process, we do rather need watch the thoughts and emotions and attitudes we are generating, for it is rather easy to slip into a mode of being we have for lifetimes indulged in, that being the personal self, and lost in the illusions of its creations. The real side always will reveal to us our reflected intent, and if we are perhaps adopting attitudes or using the mechanics of the vehicles unnecessarily, if we are immersing ourselves too much in our created thoughts, this very often is revealed to us in ways that we begin to recognize, as we continuously build upon our catalogue of features and facets of real side experiences and their meaning. For with the unique beings we all are, with our consciousness constructed in the various ways we have, so will certain real side features have a meaning that is common for all, but also features and their representations specifically unique to us. As an example, I've come to determine that situations in my street represent that which is closer to becoming a physical level actuality than that which is occurring elsewhere on the real side, and any schooling situation would be a good representation of literalism, of being to a personal self immersed, as schooling systems are very much designed for this purpose, to program a one-dimensional, surface-simulated literal consideration and focus. And although This must then be a representation common to all. I often find that if I am in a school setting, this reveals I am perhaps clinging to an attitude or overindulging the personal self, and always there is a real guide present in the classroom who tends adopt the form of individuals I once knew from my schooling days, and the guide will be seated generally besides me, playing a role as a fellow student, but as though waiting for me to recognize the illusions of literalism I am locking myself within, and to then release whatever the ideas might be, will have the classroom scene tend to switch to that of something that far more so is beneficial in regards to my awareness process, or the promoting of the ears and the various assignments, galactic-wise, etc. For the guides can always feature in our experiences, regardless of how we enclose ourselves in our personal self-illusions. For if we maintain an open agreement to the guides, like any agreement in the simulators, it is an agreement to the idea of the individual, and so we have incorporated the idea of them into the consciousness we are choosing to sit within the simulation of on such occasions as we do. It's as though we have installed an avatar of the individual that we have agreement to, and this then is a vehicle the real guides can always step into and thus feature in our simulation. It's all about agreement as to the accessibility of individuals and their simulations. Agreement is to the idea, the consciousness, and so it rather has it installed into the game of the agreeable individual, and so we can enter the simulated arenas of others by stepping into the idea consciousness vehicle of ourselves that has been provided. And of course, if we sit in the personal self, we are removed from the view where the real awareness will always show the personal self the simulation of that which it is doing in regards to a process of recognition of the ears that will present as the real side experiences the assignments and operations to that end. And were we to be completely personal self immersed, if we had free will decided to stay with creation, then this decision would have the real awareness unable to proceed, as the process does require the personal self-alignment and agreement with the real intent of the real awareness. But if, say, we have overall the focus and intent with the ears, but have had a kind of a momentary personal self-relapse, so to speak, the real awareness will be proceeding with what it's doing. It's just the personal self can't be shown the simulated rollout of it, as we have encased ourselves in the bubble illusions of it, filtering over the assignments and activities we also are doing, as we are multi-dimensional. We are operating throughout creation, generally based on our overall intent, and what the personal self sees of what's transpiring is according to what it needs to be shown at any given moment, or what it is allowing itself to be shown. And also schooling situations on the real side can be our frequenting of the universal universities, but there is a distinct recognizable difference between illusions of the consciousness personal self, or representations that are hinting at our personal self immersion or over indulging, and these universities that are in simulated creation, but in parts of it that are not intertwined with the consciousness, and thus aside from the consciousness effected simulation on the real side. For just as guides are not automatically able to feature in the consciousness effected simulation, as their consciousness vehicles are not interwoven with it, they rather have to have agreement to be installed into what is otherwise a closed simulation of a consciousness for them. So it works the other way too, that ideas can be created that are simulated, but that are not part of the overall consciousness, and so do not feature in the overall stadium for all to see. For after all, if I create something on the real side, I must step into my consciousness as I so activate the mechanics of it that I can create, and this is a consciousness intertwined with all consciousness that affects the overall simulator. In other words, I have no choice but to rather create within the overall consciousness effected simulator for all to see. But a real guide hasn't a consciousness that is meshed with the overall consciousness, and so they create an idea vehicle to operate through, and as they then create through that vehicle, they are effecting a simulation that is not in the overall simulator arena, but rather like pockets within it. And just as we need agree with the guides that they can enter our simulation, as they can't automatically by virtue of not having a consciousness that is a part of the overall consciousness, so only through a deciding to become more aware and stand with the guides, so we have these guide-created ideas provided to us. That are these created places, like the universities, that are simulated, but aside from the overall simulator arena. And as we agree with the idea, we experience the effects. We can frequent these universities, almost a case then of special invite only, which is really down to us to facilitate our own acceptance through our decision and intent to stand real with life and the guides. But anyway, in this case, it was more an overindulgence of the personal self that had me in the representation of my doing so, a classroom setting, and there would be a real guide in the form of a student I once knew. My real awareness impressions, always able to determine the guides regardless of their forms. A real awareness that is through everything creational, part of the overall everything isness and awareness that it is, that animates through all created selves, and so has the overview of everything all personal created selves comprise of, and not just what we are presented with visually on the surface. All intents and agendas are known to the real awareness therefore, and the real awareness will certainly recognize the guides that are a part of the all aliveness isness that our real awareness is also. And of course, every individual has the real awareness that animates it, but a real guide will be standing as that isness true reality while in a simulated vehicle body form, whereas a personal immersed individual will not, and the difference discernible to the real awareness. And so I would step from whatever personal self-indulgence had me in my real side bubble illusion, and the scene would change, or rather the scene would be that which my real awareness was doing, and that now my personal self could be shown the simulation of, as the personal self illusion filters overlapping it dropped away. It seemed I was on assignment with a group to assist a species of alien. I would find myself in the midst of this operation, and so only what was visually occurring could my personal self determine as to the particulars. But in came the real awareness impressions that filled in the details and the background. A real awareness that sees everything transpiring simultaneously in the nowness of its everything is reality, including what we would consider from the personal perspective to be a past that had led up to whatever current situation we are experiencing. But every decision or choice, although presenting as a cause and effect simulated rollout that are as agreed upon time phases, are in fact all present and available in the nowness is position. All are as ideas that make up the overall consciousness as it currently stands, and a real awareness that is through all consciousness can see simultaneously all the ideas that would be as though the illusion of the passage of time, but that are all here and now in reality. just as an overall movie that, although would seem to have a beginning, middle, and an end, is all, however, contained on the disc, and only the personal self goes through the simulation of it. It seemed that long ago, literally speaking, a large group of a certain alien species came to Earth, and there they remained. They established themselves underground at a certain location. The reason for this wasn't revealed. They were not ill-intended aliens, but seems they had somehow been unable to leave the planet, as though perhaps to do so would have them brushing up against the dark force controllers. The dark force controllers were aware of them, but didn't have any desire to hunt them down, but certainly were adamant that they would not be allowed to leave the Earth. These underground-based aliens had technology. Indeed, they had travelled to Earth in their spacecraft, which also were housed deep underground. But should they attempt to leave via these spacecraft, very likely they would be blasted down by the controllers. And so, these very aliens are underground on this planet now, and this would be a future view, possibly then, of making contact with them and affording them assistance. It could have just as readily been us approaching them first on the real side, and their physical level situation reflected there. As with everything, agreement for everything, including assistance, that it can be so, always must be secured, and all agreement will start on the real side. As anything we decide does transition through the aspects of the created self, the imagination and thought first, and is then in real side reality instantly so, then it must rather filter through to the physical, and the mechanics of the agreed to physical level through the consciousness dictates the physical level operation that, although is instantly so as it is decided, rather has to work through the physical level limitations to become an actuality there. If an idea agreement is a movie in and of itself, it's there in its entirety, all on the disc. But the limitations through the consciousness have the physical level situation rather having to go through the movie sequence and time phases from the beginning, the idea agreement inception point, to the culmination of it, the movie's end. For part of our assignments involve garnering agreement for our galactic creational wake-up, and also the continuous promoting of the ears and presenting of the opportunity for all, and very often to have these agreements of assistance secured, or that certain individuals or species decide to begin their own awareness processes, there very often are situations we may agree to help resolve or assist with first. For very often, if beings are in adverse situations, this can rather claim all their focus until resolved, and then afterwards, very often, they are more open to what we are presenting. And these aliens, as I said, were very technologically orientated. They, like all beings then, who have the ability to travel through the creational realm, if they stepped up also and elected to assist and share the ease, they, like all beings then, who have the ability to travel through the creational realm, if they stepped up also and elected to assist and share the ease, they would be very instrumental, as they wouldn't be limited to just one planet, such as humans are. And that these aliens underground had connections to other alien species was rather apparent, as I was accompanying a group of a good 20 or so individuals, and each individual of the group was a different species of alien, each then representing their respective species, and each species then with an affiliation with the aliens that were somewhat trapped underground on Earth. And it was as though these species representatives had all agreed to assist the plight of these underground Earth-bound aliens, and although affiliated with them, some intergalactic association they all shared, they had been reluctant to assist until this moment, possibly to avoid dark force reptilian entanglements and repercussions. And so it rather was an opportunity, and whatever negotiations had taken place, had now these various alien species representatives willing to accompany me and locate these underground aliens, for they all had between them the technological know-how to assist the underground aliens that extraction be possible. And naturally, I would be reporting this experience as I returned to the physical, as I am now, but as this group of aliens and myself entered the underground systems, I also had the task of filming all that transpired. I had a large camera balanced on my shoulder. Everything had a sense of familiarity as well, as though I'd done this before, and seeing as this was nothing I hadn't done in my current lifetime or lifetime of real side experiences, at least those that the personal self had been shown, this familiarity must then stem from a real awareness that isn't limited to just my current lifetime references of experiences, physical and real side. The personal self alone can only access its current memory of lifetimes, but of course the real awareness has access to everything we have experienced throughout our stay in this simulator, and it was as though I was supposed to know what I was doing, what role I would be playing, as it seemed I had other functions also, besides being a cameraman, and also how to operate the camera. It was like recollection of my function here was just out of reach, but almost then instinctively I would rather bodge my way through my role in this affair, and some of the aliens became a little exasperated with me. It's possible that as where this experience began, with me rather extricating myself from my personal self, a personal self that, if retained within, has us removed from the nowness of the real awareness that just knows exactly what to do, that always makes sense with life, and the personal self just observes the simulated rollout of the assignments, etc. But if the personal self interjects, if we activate through it, we are removing ourselves from this real awareness position of just knowing and doing and being, and then we may have situations such as this, where we make errors, misjudgments, as the personal self tries to do that which it can't possibly know how to do. And in this case, what should have been a smooth assignment rollout as the real awareness went about it, now became more a struggle, as I had enough real awareness standing to just about perform my part in this affair, but it was as though I had to scratch for the means and know-how, like something once learned that we are struggling to recollect years later. But nevertheless, everything was still proceeding, and this is perhaps why the personal self also is not shown certain things unless we can fully put it aside, or these situations can occur where potentially the blundering personal self can mess everything up. So for such situations, if we are over-indulging the personal self, far better to leave it in the classroom of illusionary literalism, and then the real awareness just goes about its business without personal self-interference with its operations. But anyway, we would come across the underground alien's lair, and curiously, it looked somewhat like a scene from Jules Verne's Journey to the Centre of the Earth, as here everything was like a green and tropical natural environment setting, despite being deep underground. And there I was, filming everything that was transpiring. Perhaps if this was a literal future view, I may indeed be actually participating in such activity on the physical, and maybe filming it for posterity, or perhaps just a representation of my being a witness to these events, and that my intention is always as a reporter of such. And it seems the group of assorted aliens together were able to somehow facilitate the extraction of these underground aliens, that although they were technological, they were still limited in that their ships would have to pass through what would be the perceptual range of the dark force controllers and their monitoring equipment, and very likely be destroyed at some point during their departure. These aliens then were making adjustments to the ships these underground aliens had originally used to come here to Earth, for whatever reason that they had. My impressions were that they were giving these ships the ability to move undetected in some way, or that they could jump through a created portal or something that would allow for immediate and undetectable extraction. The ships themselves were boomerang-shaped, like flying wings, and the underground aliens themselves were very tall and slender and seemed very hard to perceive. They would briefly be in your field of vision, then suddenly not be there, almost ethereal in their body types. I was informed by one of my alien group that they had body forms that were of an electromagnetic energy field that traversed several dimensions simultaneously. In other words, the human body vehicle is an electromagnetic energy field that is within the visible light of the electromagnetic spectrum that the human eye can decode. Anything outside of the visible light frequency, and the human eye can't decode it, and thus, even though it's there, we can't see it. And overall, the entire simulation is a range of frequencies and vibrations that through the physical vehicle we can only decode the physical level of, through the apparatus that decodes the visible light frequency band, which is effectively our simulated physical world. These slender, tall aliens had electromagnetic energy fields, their body vehicle base state, before it is decoded through to the holographic that traversed multiple frequencies, as I said, and so would constantly be in a state where they could 1 minute be seen as their body energy field was within the visible light frequency band, to being unseen when their energy field would move to frequencies beyond which the physical vehicle could decode. And although through the real awareness and on the real side, we are not limited to the decoding apparatus of the vehicles, which can only perceive the simulation they effect and are designed for, this, as I said, was more along the lines of a future view, and so these details were applied. And with this situation now about to be resolved, so would these tall, slender, and visually elusive beings be able to be extracted from the earth after, who knew, how long they had been here, despite their delightful, tropical, hollow earth type environment. And as I said, this situation had brought together a number of alien species through the represented individuals of them in this group. And with every situation, there is opportunity. And so it's likely these aliens and their respective species, if they haven't already, may very likely at least be more receptive to the opportunity of the ears. For there must have been agreement that facilitated my presence with them on this endeavour, and so they were open then to me and what I represented, and on the surface I didn't seem to have much of an essential function other than to film the proceedings, although there were some additional details I was involved with that I didn't manage to bring back to the physical on waking, and although any extending of the ears opportunity I didn't see in this experience, as perhaps this was a detail not necessary to be shown, undoubtedly this would have been the case once this situation had been resolved, and this would explain my overall presence. And so it will be interesting to see what comes of this, as all these aliens return to their respective species. I had the impression that the tall, slender, underground aliens now liberated would indeed now be willing to step up as a result. And as I said, they seemed to have affiliations with all manner of other alien species, and were another species capable of space travel, always a bonus, as the less limited and restricted a species are, the more they can be creationally influential. And if indeed this was maybe an actual future view situation set to occur, what reinforced this possibility is that I had the impression of when this was set to take place, which was this month, and specifically November the 20th, 2021. This real side experience was in 3 parts. The first part reminded me a little of several real side experiences I have had over the years and continue to do so, where it's as though the greater bulk of humanity, consisting of the unconscious unaware, as it always has, and possibly always will, had been mobilized or motivated or programmed in a way to hunt down and either kill the rest of humanity or convert them in some technological way. For generally the few that retain their real intent to recognize the ears, that stand real with their real awareness in the midst of deteriorating situations on the physical, are the survivors in such real side experiences, surviving the pull of creation, that they are not absorbed into it and fall back with the personal self to join the multitudes of the unaware and the zombified unconscious masses. A precarious maintenance of focus, navigating all the pitfalls that every idea in creation represents, to not agree with any of them and be sucked down with the rest and into the effects. Seems that as the multitudes become progressively more robotized through the vaccines and the nanotech contents of these vaccinations, that they are controlled more so and have the inclination, or are controlled through their agreements to this tech that now pervades their physical bodies, to seek out those that are not locked into the control system as they are, and eliminate them or convert them. For several real side experiences have I seen the robotized nano-infused masses operating like the Borg in Star Trek, with the ability to convert others through a transmission of the nanotechnology through physical contact. And in a few more extreme real side experience situations, an AI system that is sending a mechanical army to hunt down and simply eliminate the survivors. For it seems that agreement is a factor, in that it is a choice to be vaccinated, to be agreeing in general to the control systems, and accepting of this potential robotized and controlled state. But the delivery system for the nanotech is very extensive, through the chemtrails, food, etc., and rather unavoidable. And so the key element to surviving a kind of robotic controlled situation is through the mitigation that the recognition of the real awareness may afford. For it's very likely that the new U song will mitigate the 5G as an example. The 5G, which is designed to activate this nanotech and bring forth mass robotization in all who have it in their bodies. Maybe not necessarily even that the new you song, or recognition and standing in the real awareness, may prevent such a robotization, but with the ability to step into the real awareness that is aside from the personal self, regardless of the body form, allows an indifference and objective position from even a completely programmed robotic body vehicle. As in such a robotic state, the thoughts generated would no longer be of our own free will construction, but that of the control system the robotic vehicles are now locked into. So for the new friends and those on their becoming more aware process, they would rather have perhaps their own bombardment of programmed thoughts from an external source through robotized vehicles, but can appreciate how they are not of their own making, and able to stand indifferent to them in their real awareness. They wouldn't be absorbed into the effects of them. They would be conscious of them and simply disregard them as created ideas, not their own, in the same way as we would any thought and emotion idea that makes up the created consciousness, a practice of standing aside from the personal self and being in the nowness of the real awareness that is a standard anyway for those becoming more aware. And so these experiences are all potential possibilities of the various future view options according to whatever agreement is secured. If the AI is indeed ultimately utilized for control purposes, and humanity is robotized through 5G nanotech and locked into it, all depending on agreement. And so, in this latest real side experience, I had another similar view of the robotized zombie masses seeking out the survivors, those on their process of awareness, and able to avoid then being absorbed into the same controlled situation that the unconscious unaware had been assimilated into. For I would be with a group of aware individuals, and we were on the run. Our pursuers were numerous and relentless, and had that rather cold, calculating indifference about their intentions that suggested a rather robotized state of being, although outwardly their physical bodies appeared very human. So maybe the preliminary stages of such a robotized control system, before perhaps the body vehicles become externally robotized, although as we evaded our pursuers, roaming between the buildings of the towns and cities, were these gigantic, metallic, robotic machines. They looked very much like mechanical squids, with a large section as the body, and appendages that sprouted from the front. The purposes of these contraptions became apparent, as they were designed to seize the survivors with their tentacle-like arms, those not already robotically converted, even if the robotization was only internally at this point, and then pull the poor wretches into the metal body section. Although the fate of those captured wasn't made apparent, my impression was that some kind of robotic conversion was taking place inside the metal squids. So very much a case of the masses mobilized to seek out the survivors and feed them, as it were, to the robot converting squids. These metallic squids were presumably created and sent forth by an AI system now utilized for this controlling purpose. The squids didn't seem especially sentient, and indeed, as we were occasionally successfully seized by some of the masses, we threw them into the arms of the metallic squids, and they were taken into the bodies of them instead of us. So the squids were not designed to differentiate between the unconscious and the aware, just to grab whatever was thrust into their tentacles. The scene switched, and it was as though situations had progressed a little, and it had become necessary to avoid the ground, where the masses of zombified hunters and squid robots lurked, as though options were made available as an alternative to just being on the run, as this was rather futile, and inevitably it was only a matter of time before we would be captured. For now, the aware individuals and myself all had the ability to fly. We might construe this as a representation of maintaining our real awareness in difference to a creation, of getting above it and having the greater view through the real awareness, but maybe more literal in this case, for we all seemed to have more a mechanical means of flying, and for the purposes of metal squid and zombie robot masses evasion. It was almost as though we had utilized the nanotech in our bodies with our real awareness know-how, nanotech that was unavoidable due to the varied, inescapable delivery systems. And we then were activating the nano to our advantage, in that we had utilized the nanotech to create beneficial metallic additions to our bodies that allowed for flight in various unique and ingenious ways. Either that, or these were the body types made available to those on their process of awareness, more resilient body types to cope better with the ever-increasing stresses of the physical, stresses made unbearable on more vulnerable flesh and blood bodies. And I have seen various real-side experiences revealing this as an option, of the assumption of more robust and capable body types. And here in this experience, some aware individuals had literally converted themselves into aircraft, like a transformer robot. Others simply had metallic wings emerging from their backs that served the same avian purpose. I had created large wings sprouting from my shoulder blades, and even designed them that they looked somewhat dragonic, even though metallic, for if you're going to grow metal wings, you may as well make them stylish. And there we were, flying above the robotized masses. The scene would end there, and perhaps there is more still to see and will be revealed in future experiences. The scene ended, but not the experience overall, as suddenly I would find myself removed into a new situation. I was with a large group of individuals, the becoming more aware variety, and it seems we were traversing very precarious landscape. leading us was an individual that I impressioned was a real guide, a very stern, no-nonsense character, who was certainly exhibiting zero tolerance for inadequacy as to what we were doing, and perhaps understandably so, for I had the impression that this was rather a kind of future view of a last chance saloon situation, so to speak, that situations on Earth and in the simulator as a whole had reached such a crisis point that time was now of the essence. If you wanted to get out of a creation, you had to do it now. There was no more room for error, fluctuation of focus, or deviation of real intent. My impressions were that this large extensive group of aware individuals and myself were there or thereabouts with the recognition enough, and having earned our way sufficiently, that our real survival and extrication from creation was possible, but not guaranteed or assured, as though we all were taking the final steps, releasing the final agreements, finishing our processes of becoming aware enough that we would not be caught in a doomed simulator, but a razor's edge situation, for it always was that a single idea agreement was enough to hold you to a creation. But now, in this case, holding to any idea could be perilous, as getting out of a creation on the verge of collapse depended on the decision of letting the entirety of creation and the personal self go or not. Hence the stern mannerism of the real guide that led us through a landscape that was disintegrating beneath our very feet, for he wanted that we succeeded, and the way of him and his no-nonsense approach was for our benefit. No room for foolishness or fluctuation of intent. It was a time to get real. It was rather curious how, as we proceeded, we could only stand on each piece of the ground once, and then that part of the ground would weaken, and any subsequent stepping upon it would have the individual falling through the weakened place and plummet into an endless abyss beneath. The abyss was a darkness, a forbidding void, and representing for those that fell into it the absorption back into creation, and probably for them this would spell their end in regards to any chance of getting out of creation at what was the 11th hour. None of us would fall as far as I noticed, but many an individual, including myself, came close. The real guide devised a kind of zigzagging forward motion, with us all interlocking arms, that made it so that not one piece of ground was stepped on twice. And with us all interlocked in this way, if an individual took a misstep onto an already utilized area of ground and was about to fall, we all could assure their survival, a kind of representation of a mutual support between the aware group, supporting and assisting each other through the final steps, so to speak. At first I wondered if the view and idea represented in this experience was of the simulator being erased piece by piece, similar to that which I had shared on a previous experience, whereas the overall created consciousness was fragmented and absorbed, compacted into a focal point, a final black hole, the final culmination of agreement to a restriction, expressed as compaction and implosion. The simulator it maintained was becoming fragmented and made less also, as the creational simulator is comprised of the construction of the consciousness that manifests it. Fragment and remove parts of the consciousness, parts of the simulator must simply vanish and be no more also. And this was very much shown in that experience. Whole chunks of decided and agreed upon parts of creation simply winking out of existence. This could well have been the case here in this experience, as we precariously traversed a simulator vanishing beneath our feet. In our last moments of required is recognition, a recognition needed to supersede the simulator. Talk about cutting it fine. But then each part of the ground only vanished as we trespassed upon it a second time. It wasn't a random vanishing of sections or areas of creation. Perhaps it was more a case of these ground sections being ideas generally shared by the group here, ideas we now had to let go of, as though we were identifying, stepping upon them one final time, and one final opportunity to release them. No second chances, no flip-flopping. There was no time left for deliberation and going back and forth. We were identifying these last array of ideas one by one, that which were still tapline anchoring us to creation, then releasing them, letting them go. But if you went back to them again, stepping on the same piece of ground that represented each idea, you would fall. It was literally do or die, as we made our way through the fragile ground of ideas, walking through them, letting them go, never to look back, and maybe a few precarious moments of doubt represented by a misstep onto the same idea piece of ground, but with the overall real intent maintained. So was the support available through the interlocked and overall focused group. Of course, were an individual unable to let an idea agreement go, no amount of support could override what was a free will decision to effectively remain in an imploding simulator, and that individual was resigned to their choice. The ground overall, the precarious ground of final ideas to release, representing the personal self-foundation, that which we had maintained to relate to recognize the is from as a comparison, but a foundation ground and personal self that had now served its purpose, and we simply had to step beyond it. Interestingly, as much as that experience was a very real future view scenario, I would suggest, what followed was a brief, repetitive sequence along the same lines, but almost as a kind of a practice for the actual situation of a final personal self-idea releasing and extraction from a doomed simulator, almost like a training simulator for a smaller group and myself, and I'm sure all the others from the large group were going through similar. This smaller group and I were going through a metallic chamber that, just like the previous and very real situation, had sections of the metallic ground that could not be walked on twice. The only difference being that we could repeat the process from one end of the simulated scenario to the other as many times as necessary. For unlike the actual future event, time wasn't an issue here, as we weren't on the verge of a simulator implosion. This was like a practice for the real deal, and we were at liberty to make errors, to fall through the gaps in the floor created as we trespassed twice on the same personal self-idea agreement that each section represented, as though we were being made of these final array of idea agreements, and identifying those that we evidently still were clinging onto, made apparent by our stepping on the same part of the idea floor twice and falling through. But as much as this was a practice run, soon would come the day and time when it would be for real, and one surely would want at that point then an iron, real intent, a recognized, real awareness, and with everything of the created consciousness of the personal self, all agreements and attachments revealed and let go of.
Okay, Kevin, thank you again. We'll do the new you and new